Welcome to another episode of Threads of Enlightenment. As usual, I like to stop right here and say thank you to our guests because I know they're coming with a couple of things I deem very expensive: time. That commodity is being misused by so many, and many of them don't understand the value of it and the cost of it. And we are all allotted the same amount, so we can't say that one person has more than the other. So what we do with it will dictate what type of life we have. The other is their journey, and I want to thank Michael for coming and sharing that journey because it made him who he is today. And as a result of our conversation, we are going to get to become even much more mature individuals while we are here on this planet. Michael, thank you for coming to Threads of Enlightenment, man.
Ken, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Excellent. Tell the people what you do and paint that picture as rosy as you can. You tell them about your consultation, you tell them about everything and how to access you, and then we will engage in our conversation
Sure,
and
sure.
get to know you.
Absolutely. So I'm Michael Spremulli, and I'm a personality profiler turned professional astrologer. Now I know that may sound odd or a little bit of juxtaposition, but allow me to elaborate a little bit. I never forget the experience that got me interested in astrology. It goes
Mhm.
back right when I got out of college and was working the year between my undergraduate and then going to graduate school. Someone at work had gifted me a reading with a professional astrologer, and the term professional is key. We'll get back to that later. And I'd never been. I didn't know. It's like I was raised in a faith that shied away from those type of things, and it's like I was conflicted. I said, let me have the reading because I trusted this person, and I said, let's see what it's all about. I proceeded to go to this woman's home office, and for an hour and a half, she proceeded to describe my entire life up till that point, very specifically, I might add. We're not talking about generalities. She described what I was struggling with at the moment and then where I was looking to go a couple, 3, 4 years down the road. And I said, how on earth is she able to access this information and provide clarity on these situations from just my birth data? So I was hooked at that moment. But I was heading off to graduate school to get a
Mhm.
master's in clinical psych, which flies in the face of astrology and metaphysics and a lot of things that you would think would fall under the personal development umbrella. So
Yeah.
I started to study astrology underground for many, many years and took various courses, read a whole lot of books, got really high end, sophisticated software to run charts, and started to teach myself over the years how astrology actually works. And it's nothing like you see in the newspapers and online as far as sun sign astrology. Those are fun things, but professional astrology is a different bag. Well, fast forward a bit in time, I run into this astrologer down in Gainesville, Florida, who actually has been studying this branch of astrology that I now work with almost exclusively called
Mhm.
vibrational astrology. And the reason that's important is because VA, for short, is the only form of astrology where you've got scientific data to validate its claims. And
Mhm.
that hooked my attention immediately because coming out of graduate school, I had the whole scientific method drilled into my head,
Yeah.
uh, making sure that you have data to back things up. And that was one of the things that there was a disconnect for me on. And I had an internal struggle, which we can chat about, where I knew that astrology was beneficial and that it worked. But there was also this component of, yeah, but I got to square the science. Fast forward even further to here we are today. And this is now, it's like, all right, there's science, there's data. I'm comfortable. And now I'm out of the astrological closet, so to speak. And it was something that I kept very quiet for years. And I had clients underground, and I didn't advertise, I didn't put anything out there. For fear of, because listen, I get it. You mentioned you're an astrologer, and the looks are like, people step back a little bit.
Yeah.
It's there's a lot to it, and part of where I'm at now is I've seen the value of this in my own life, of course, and many other people's lives. I'm wanting to help dispel a lot of the myths that are associated with astrology and make it a bit accessible to others to help them understand, hey, here's how you can use this stuff in your life to clarify your previous experiences and understand your past, and then also how to maximize your future. So that's me in about a minute and 30 some odd seconds.
That is awesome. So let's go back to your family because you mentioned a little thing conflicted, and I know that
Sure.
has to be with your upbringing, and usually it comes from a religious upbringing, if you will. So
Mhm.
take us back to your family. What was that like in your home as this young buck is being introduced into the world and spending time with his family? Talk to us about that.
Yeah. So, thankfully, that comes from a very supportive family. And, had mom and dad. My dad passed several years back, but they were married for 50 years, very
Wow.
traditional in that sense. Grew up Roman Catholic. Uh, and we were my dad was a auto repair shop owner. He was a mechanic, and my mom worked as an executive assistant. So middle class folks, but
Hmm.
grateful to have our basic needs were provided for. Life is good, but they didn't get the whole. I guess now looking back on it, I'd call it the metaphysical component, because I was always interested in things like clinical hypnosis. I studied that and did that work for a while, and tarot and things that are outside of the mainstream of what I was growing up with as far as religion. I wanted to explore a little bit. I kind of kept all that quiet to my family, at least in the beginning, because I knew that they probably weren't going to appreciate that whole side of things, and that's cool. But
Yeah, yeah.
uh, but from an upbringing standpoint, it's pretty normal, boring, and unremarkable.
How old were you, Michael, when you had the inclination towards the metaphysical and spiritual aspects of
It's
things?
interesting because I can tell you exactly when that happened.
Yeah.
I went to Catholic grade school, grade school, high school, and university.
Hmm.
When I graduated with my undergraduate and got out of the cocoon, so to speak,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
took my very first job at a psychiatric hospital, that was the first time I came in contact with those who weren't faith based for the most part in my
Hmm.
world. And I said to myself, there's a whole new world out here that I didn't quite
Hmm.
become aware of
Yeah.
until that moment. And then when I got to graduate school, forget about it, because that was a
Yeah.
state school and, no religious affiliation. Then I was like, whoa, there's really a big world out here. And I'm not discounting my formative experiences. They were very
Yeah.
positive
Yeah.
and still have very rich lessons that were learned there and very fond memories. But there was more, is what I
Yeah.
discovered. And then that's when the floodgates opened. So, in graduate school, it's like I'm studying clinical psychology by day and all the other stuff at night. And that's when the
Hmm.
ball really started to pick up some steam.
So here you are, you graduate school and you started studying. As you said, um, what were some of those things that you began to notice? Because again, you're bringing in new information into your space.
Right.
As you were bringing these new information into your space, Michael, what was beginning to happen to you as you're studying this and seeing it? What were those thoughts that were dancing within your mind, if you will?
The initial thought was,
Hmm.
wow, there's more than one way to view the world.
Yeah.
Because when you're raised in any faith, and I'm not just picking on one in particular, we have this idea of this is the way things are,
Hmm.
and that's it. And okay, there's some benefit to that, but I'm a naturally curious guy. When I was a kid, I was the type of kid who took apart the radio to see if there was a little band
Hmm.
playing in there because I just was curious. And as soon as I started to realize that there were different ways of viewing the world, I remember I got a set of runes. I don't know if you ever work with rune stones. With you
Yes.
put the stones in the bag and you pull the
Hmm.
bag, pull one out, and you look up the corresponding meaning. I was fascinated with that. I said, "This is amazing." You just kind of put your question out there or your intention, and you pull the stone and read the. Because I would do that once a day to start my day. I said, "This is pretty cool," and it kind of gave me a frame of reference for the day. So I
Yeah.
started to realize these things and started to explore. It's almost like a domino effect. When you get into a new world, you want to start exploring things,
Yeah.
and it was like, wow, there's a lot here. And one of the things that took me probably 20 years to figure out was you got to find out what resonates with you. So
Hmm.
here's an example. I am very familiar with tarot. I used to do tarot readings for others a long time ago. I use it now as a more of a self development tool myself. But I knew that if I was going to take something to the world, tarot wasn't going to be it, because
Yeah.
it just it was beneficial, and there were things that it helped me clarify and gave me perspective on, but it didn't really fit squarely with who I was and what I was about. So I went on this kind of low key search to figure out, well, there's something in this world that is very magical and very comforting, and all the other things that we're now discovering and science is validating,
Hmm.
that aren't all that far fetched. Things that we thought used to be far fetched. We're in one spot and we can have thoughts and they can affect other people on the other side of the globe. That used to be lunacy until recent
Yeah.
research came out where they're doing proton analysis, figuring out you take a particle, you split it here and over here, and what you do to this particle is reacting over here in the other side of wherever. So I went off into a rabbit hole here, but I
No,
tend to
no,
do that.
no. It makes sense though. It makes sense because it all comes to the connectivity of all, isn't it?
The connect
Um,
exact and
and
that and now
so, you know,
you talk about. See, you got me out of the rabbit hole. You talk about being in alignment.
yeah.
VA, vibrational astrology, that's the whole
Hmm.
premise. It
Yeah.
works from this idea that everything vibrates. We've heard that over and
Oh
over
yeah.
again. We
Hmm.
vibrate as human beings. Your cell phone vibrates. A
Yeah.
piece of wood vibrates, different frequencies, but any piece of matter vibrates. And the idea with vibrational astrology is very simple. It helps us as humans figure out what is the optimal way for energy to flow through us. And we're all unique, and we all have our own unique game board or serial number, so to speak, which comes from the natal chart in astrology. And even if two people were born at the exact same time, at the exact on the exact same day in different places, you're still going to have unique planetary placements based on where they were in the world and what have you. So when I ran into VA and then discovered that there was data there, I lit up. I said, "Okay, I think the search. I don't want to say
Yeah.
the search is over, but this was a big find."
Yeah. It's really fascinating to when you're dealing with people who or for whatever reason don't understand the value of themselves. It's really interesting, as you mentioned, that they're so unique. Each individual is so unique, even down to the stars and the location and the movement and
Sure.
all of those different things, that uh, the preciousness of ourselves. And when they begin to see the value of themselves, it's really interesting because you mentioned even if you are born identical time, minute, second, whatever, across the different places, there is that differences between them. And I try to tell people um, they are making billions of dollars, Michael, on the fact that we are so unique. We have
Yeah.
the face recognition, fingerprinting, voice
Right.
recognition, with just millions and billions of dollars on the uniqueness of us. And so I try to tell people, every one of them that has ever come on this planet is a different, is a endangered species. And if you begin to
Yeah.
look at yourself as an endangered species, you are going to be mindful of how you treat yourself, one, and how you allow people to treat you, two. And so it's very important, as you state. that even from that aspect of the astrological part, you're unique. And so here you are. Go ahead, go ahead. I see you were trying to
No,
say something.
I was just going to say, and you're absolutely correct. And one of the things that I can attest to, not only from the astrology side, but from my work for the past 25 years as a corporate personality profiler to help companies identify the best person for the best job, that is, everybody's got a set of talents. You just got to
Hmm.
figure out where they are. And some of them may be deep, locked away inside you, but everybody's got something to bring to the world. And you may not know exactly what that is. Some people know when they're 10,
Yeah.
they're lucky. Others don't. But you've got to keep searching to figure out what it is that gets you up out of bed in the morning. Because once you do that, then you can get on a path that resonates with you rather than get on the treadmill. I'm always a fan of paths. I hate the treadmill.
It is. I love what you're talking about because it forces you to be honest with yourself. Number one, to identify
Mm-hmm.
your location, and that's always important in any type of development, if you will. Um, when you are going to now take a look and uh, come to a situation or any kind of condition, one needs to figure out and locate what it is, and then once you have located it, then you're able to make the adjustments to do it. So here you are. I want to go back a little, Michael. You
Yeah.
graduated, you're on the ground, as you say, and doing all the studies and so forth. And you got your degree, and where did you head to once you graduated? Because you talked about your professional life, and I want to go back there a little to see how you got in there, and what were you doing in there, and how did you feel while you were in there doing the
Mhm.
underground thing?
So my plan was to get a PhD and set up a private practice as a psychologist.
Hmm.
Well, that plan didn't end up happening. And I look in the rearview mirror now and I say, thank you, universe, because I would not be a happy camper.
Yeah.
The reason it didn't happen was I ended up not getting into any PhD programs. They were incredibly competitive.
Hmm.
And it didn't. I got a master's, which is okay, but if you're going to be doing clinical assessment and those types of things, you really need a PhD. So I was defeated. I mean, I was like, oh, what am I going to do now? I
Yeah.
guess I got to go find a job with a master's degree. Well, in the city where I had got my graduate degree, there were two places where you worked if you got a master's in clinical psych, and that was either behavioral mental health or the prison system. And
Hmm.
behavioral mental health wasn't hiring. They were in the middle of a hiring freeze. So guess where I ended up? I ended up working for a Department of Corrections. And
Yeah.
if that wasn't an eye opener, for many, many reasons, it was like, okay. So, the first 6 months, it's like, oh, this is fascinating. You're learning about all this
Yeah.
pathology and you're seeing all the things that you read in the textbooks come to life. 6 months and one day, I started planning my escape. I said, no, this isn't going to work. It's not going to happen
Yeah.
because we don't know each other, but you can kind of tell I'm a high energy, optimistic, try to be
Yeah.
upbeat guy, likes to go with the flow. Well, prison is 180-degree opposite of that. Everything is scheduled, structured, details. It's like it just wasn't for me. So what I ended up doing was taking a leap of faith.
Hmm.
And I'd always, I always liked giving class presentations. I was the oddball. I liked
Yeah.
getting up in front of groups. And at that point, I said, maybe I could start my own company and do some training or something like that. So again, it seems like I'm always, lurking in the shadows while I'm at the
Yeah.
prison.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
here trying to get this company. It's like you got this diametrically opposed situation. You want to make publicity, but you don't want to let your current employer know that that you're, firing something up. So I'm trying to get things rolling. Finally, I ripped the Band-Aid off, put it out there, and I had a plan to quit my work as a mental health counselor in the
Hmm.
prison system. So then I started doing some work. I just, I kind of jumped in one of those situations where you just didn't exactly know what to do, but I
Yeah.
started calling companies and saying, "Hey, I do this type of training. I could speak at your event." And then I'd figure out how to do it afterwards. Like so many of us, who've gone before me have said, you
Yeah.
just get in there and start doing it. And that was great. I started actually, I had some national clients. I'm flying around the country doing these management and leadership training sessions. Didn't know what I was doing, but they
Yeah.
seemed to like it. They kept having me back. And that was all great until September 11th hit.
Yeah.
And the problem there was the first thing that got cut out of any training, but any budget was training and staff development because
Yeah.
everyone was nervous. Companies were just pulling their money back. So I was basically facing the fact that I was kind of, out of a job for a
Yeah.
while,
Yeah.
anyways. Now, a mentor of mine had told me while all this was going on, he said, Mike, he said, you really need to look at focusing on the employee selection side of things. He said, you use assessments in your training, which I did. He said, but
Hmm.
here's the reason why this is important and beneficial. Hiring may slow down, but once you can show companies how to predict behavior of future applicants so that they can hire the best people,
Yeah.
they're going to, they may slow the hiring down, but ultimately they're going to come back to you once they start hiring again, because that's going to be perceived as a must have versus
Yeah.
training. And I hate to say this because I'm a big believer in good quality training. There's a lot of junk training out there, by the way, but it's one of those things where if you're, I lost my train of thought. This happens. By the way, I'm an adult ADHD person who was officially diagnosed 3 years ago, which explains a whole lot. And the sad thing is basically when you become a man of a certain age and they discover that you have ADHD, it's like, okay, well, deal with it. You've dealt with it all this far. There's no easy fix.
Yeah.
Anyways, I was heading toward a very poignant and a powerful story that I completely forgot where I was going, but we'll come back. It always circles back.
Yeah, my granddaughter says I suffer from that. So, and I think I trust her professional clinical study because that's what she calls her grandpa. She tells us that's what you have, Papa. So here you are, Mike. It's a great move. I think that's an insightful thing that your friend had said because an employer. There's a lot of onboarding, if you will, but as far
Oh
as
yeah,
training, there's not a lot of training, man. Um, they just give you the basic that you need and just let you loose and
yeah,
see what happens. But yeah,
right.
when you come in and you now are creating a space by which you can identify those that will be more effective within the corporate space. Um, Talk to me about that because that is really fascinating piece when you
Oh yeah.
talk to
Oh,
them and
that's
how,
perfect. You just got me back to my lost thought. This was a
yeah.
I, so so that's exactly what I did. The
Yeah.
training kind of dried up, and it was like then I started pursuing companies saying, "Hey, look," and I was very confident in this because that's what my whole graduate degree was: how to
Hmm.
interpret various types of assessments, and I
Yeah.
was good at it. And I'm not bragging there. People would be petrified because what we had to do every week in those type of sessions for many rounds, you get up, you have assessment results, and then you have to stand in front of a classroom and interpret what these dots on a page meant. And I was pretty good
Yeah.
at the pattern recognition and then remembering what ended up becoming associated with those patterns. So I
Hmm.
started marketing myself and using the leverage of my network, letting people know, hey, this is something we can do for you. And again, it was a great thing. It was miserable at the time of the transition because you're
Yeah.
wondering where the next piece of business is going to come from. But here's why it was wonderful, because in the assessment world, I don't have to be on a stage or doing something in order to generate revenue.
Yeah.
Because assessments, you can get companies set up. And yeah, I come in to do I do remote consultations to interpret the results with some of them, but it lent itself to be able to give me a bit more flexibility. And I didn't have to be trading time for dollars, which I'm sure is a concept that you discuss with your listeners a lot. You can do a little bit of that, but if all you do is trade time for dollars, everyone has the same amount of time, as you said at the start of the show. and
Yeah.
you're going to limit yourself. So that has been the bulk of my corporate stuff, which I still do. I still do the personality assessment, and what'll happen is clients, they find the people. I'm not a headhunter. I'm not an HR guy. I'm your data guy. So you get your
Yeah.
top 3 or 5 applicants. We run them through our assessments, and depending on the level of assessment, if it's a high, a sales job or high level or manager, I'll get in and interpret the results for them. Other tools are more self-service based. And I realized, and this is what the training piece didn't fulfill in me. I
Hmm.
realized with the employee selection stuff that I was making an impact and moving a company's needle, and that made me sleep good at night. I
Yeah.
can't stand running into people who are selling pipe dreams that have no practicality, and everyone's selling these coaching programs and this and that. And some of them are good, but a lot of them, the people might have been doing nothing
Yeah.
before they launched this coaching program. So, but when I'd have people, the proof is in the pudding, right?
Yeah.
People come
Yeah.
back. I've got clients that I've been servicing for over 20, close to 25, if not over 25 years. They're not going to keep coming back if I wasn't able to generate results.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that I didn't generate some results while providing employee training, but it's harder to track, because how do there's ways you can kind of measure it, but it's a lot better when I say to someone, hey, be careful about this applicant. You've got numerous warning flags here. And then they take a shot and they hire the person anyways, despite the recommendation. Then they come back and say, remember that one you warned us about? And I know where the conversation is going. I say, yeah,
Yeah.
how are they working out? Well, not so good. And I want the clients to have success, but once they experience that situation at least one time, then they realize, Spremulli here might have something going on, and maybe we should listen to what's happening. And that closes the loop on this long story of you got to do not only what moves the needle for other people, but what moves the needle for you. I feel very comfortable knowing that I have done and continue to do my very best to provide the most accurate information on the corporate side
Yeah.
for folks to make decisions. And it's a service, and it's something of value, and it's not fluff. I cringe when I see people, as I mentioned, trying to put out projects or processes that either just are so basic you can Google the stuff, or you're not really providing any value. And when we provide value to others, you know the drill. It comes back a
Yeah.
hundredfold.
Yeah. Corporate America is now, I know, back in the 80s and 90s and stuff like that, when the onset of the those tests became started to become a reality. I remember going on an interview for a test, and it's really interesting. I noticed something about me as the
Mm-hmm.
test kept going on.
Yeah.
Was I came in, I did the test, the personality test with the first guy, and after I did the test, he said to me, "Wait," and he said, "I'll be right back." He takes off. He bring a manager. The
Yeah.
manager talked to me and whatever. We did our thing. He said, "Wait, we'll be right back." So he takes, while they're interviewing me and so forth, based on this personality test. They kept me there, Michael, for this whole process took like about 4 hours.
I
And
believe it.
so the final person that they had me to interview or to wait for was the CEO of the organization at the time.
Mm-hmm.
By that time, the 4 hours, I was so worn out and mentally exhausted
Right.
that when he started questioning me, I was coming back like really fast and stuff like that, but just from exhaustion.
Sure.
But his personality, and as you get higher up on that in that conversation, time was very important to him. So he appreciated the fact by the time I
Right.
was so
Right.
exhausted from the stuff that I was just shooting the things back at him, and he was shooting back at me, and we were shooting at each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
I got up and I left, and they were doing everything they could to hire me based on that personality test that I took, and it actually enabled me to get the salary, more than the salary than what I came in for, because of that test. Because I recognized that that tool was very important for them,
Right.
and the fact that they are moving me forward in different levels, that I must be of some value to them, and so it was able to for me to get what I thought was my value from the conversation. So yeah, I could see where it works really, really good.
And by the way, that that type of process, which was popular in the 80s, is now done all remotely
Yep.
and is gotten at in probably about an hour's worth of time, and we can test
Yeah.
people anywhere in the world. So that's how that's evolved. But basically, what that process does and what our process does on the employee selection side is we get to the core of the individual. We have
Yeah.
multiple measures and that figure out, what drives the person, what are their behavior tendencies, is their personality, what is their cognitive ability, and it paints a picture. Which, interestingly enough, when we fast forward to astrology, it's a lot of the same mechanisms at play. I'm just using a different tool to
Yeah.
interpret, which is what made the leap initially seem real daunting. Now it's like, okay, I get it. I get it. The universe has been teaching me how
Yeah.
to
You were
interpret these
preparing.
dots, interpret these dots on a page for assessments.
Yeah.
Now it's just a matter of taking the information in someone's astrological chart along with the transits and telling the story. We're just using a different tool. And
Yeah.
when that connection went off in my head, it was like, okay, now I
Yeah.
think I've landed where I need to be, because we test things as we go through various experiences. And some environments like, yeah, that's kind of cool, but I'm not quite feeling it, or no, that's not for me. And I had so many of those experiences. But then once everything came full circle with the astrology also being grounded in the science, it's like I'm home. I am
Yeah.
home, and
I've
then full
I,
tilt from there on.
yeah. I think, and I try to tell people that everything that you are going to use in your life, you are going to go through it. You don't know it.
Yep.
And then every
Yep.
little job that you are taking that you think it's just some kind of remedial type of work, the principle that you're gaining and the wisdom from that position, trust me, you are going to
Mm-hmm.
use it. It is never, nothing is wasteful on this planet when it comes to your training of your to get them bring you into your servanthood, if you will. Everything
Mm-hmm.
will be used, every single thing. That's why I tell people, relax, don't panic,
Yep.
because most people will start yelling, oh, I'm not doing anything. Trust me, you are. just
Yeah.
uh, just relax, and you will move through to your space. So now here you are, Michael, you are doing the professional thing, and you're seeing and helping with that aspect. Now you're still on the ground as we're moving through this stuff. So here you are on the ground, and what were you doing with your knowledge outside of the professional things? What were you doing to your knowledge, and what was it doing to you, Michael? What was all of this stuff that you were doing on the ground? What was
Mm-hmm.
happening to you as you were gathering
Well,
all of that?
it's interesting. I'm going to go back to a comment that you just made a moment ago, that everything is sort of prepping you for the next phase of life.
Yeah.
I'm going to validate that for you right on the spot here. Back in the day, I had done a tremendous amount of radio interviews talking about assessment and corporate hiring and these types of things. Got zero business from it, none.
Yeah.
But I did a lot of it. And it's like, all right, well, now I know how to do that. And there you were having to speak. And, this was before podcasts where we have open
Yeah.
ended formats, and you had to compress your message and talking points, and 2 to 3 minutes was the extent of the interview. Well, guess what? Podcasts come along, and it's like, oh, heck, I could jump in there and be a guest. That's easy now,
Yeah.
because I went through all that 20 years ago with the whole idea of having to get those skills implanted. And then, at the time, it's like, well, I did have some of those thoughts. well, this is a waste of time. But now in hindsight, it's like you can wake me up at 3 in the morning and say, hey, we got a major news outlet on the phone. Can you talk astrology? Or even corporate stuff. I'm ready to
Yeah.
go because
Yeah.
I know what's needed. So that echoes your statement of anything that you're experiencing now, even if you're not digging it, not enjoying it, or not seeing
Yeah.
much of a output, there's use for it down the road. And that's happened entirely throughout my business as a personality expert, because that just bleeds over into the astrology world. But going
Hmm.
back to what you had said before, as far as with what's happening there, I had this, I was staying current in my corporate stuff, but that's when the desire on, and we'll just call it, the metaphysical world, I guess you can say,
Yeah.
and my interest there started to really pick up and steamroll. But for years I kept these two worlds separate. I did not want them colliding, because I was afraid that, well, if my corporate people find out I'm doing astrology, and then if the astrology people, I find out I'm in court, but it's like that. I put myself through so much torture unnecessarily.
Yeah.
I had never lost a client when someone has said, "Oh, I didn't know you're into that." A lot of people say, "Oh, can I get a consultation?" But it was like I was creating my own mental angst unnecessarily. And I don't force anything on anybody. If someone wants to talk astrology, I'll talk astrology 8 hours a day with them. But if they don't, that's cool too. And I think, just to step back a little bit, at the time of this recording, the world's on edge. Everybody's on a hair trigger. Everybody's,
Yeah.
ramped up, and everyone's dug into their mindset. I can't help but wonder, what would happen if people just kind of had their beliefs, whatever they are, did their beliefs, and just kind of let other people do their own stuff,
Yeah.
without having to
Yeah.
force anything, which is
Yeah.
my point. I don't tell folks, well, if you don't study astrology, you're going to miss the boat. No, that's just one tool of probably hundreds that are out there. It's one I happen to
Yeah.
like, and have
Yeah.
seen it play out, and it can be very powerful. But you know, let people kind of find their way. And, who
Yeah.
is it for me or anyone else to say this is the way it has to be? Because as soon as
Yeah.
we head down that path, it's game over, not in a good way.
Yeah. So how did you reconcile this, Michael? Because you have this dichotomy that is happening with
Hmm.
you. You didn't want one to know the other and the other to know the other and so forth. And those two worlds obviously collided now that you're able to uh, uh, you know function in both. So how did you relax? How did you give it up? Did you
Yeah.
surrender then and
Uh, I,
allow you to be?
I'll tell you, it was not an easy process. It was an
Yeah.
internal struggle. And, like most things, what does it come down to? Fear, usually,
Yeah.
when you trace it
Hmm.
all the way down. And I touched on
Yeah.
that before, until finally I got to the point where it was like, you know what? I'm just going to do this. My intentions are pure. I know what I'm striving to do here. I'm just going to do it. And like I said, I'm not putting astrology stuff in the faces of corporate people or vice versa, but I
Yeah.
just kind of let go of the rope, so to speak. And
Yeah.
that's easier said than done. And I'll be the first to go on record and tell you that. But once you can do it, it's like, yeah, that's right. I'm in. And here's something else I learned too about astrology. Take all your preconceived notions and stereotypes of who you think may be interested in astrology and throw them out the window.
Yeah.
Because early on, when I started to kind of open up and go public, I'd be like, oh, this person isn't going to be interested in astrology because of whatever reasons, background, faith based stuff. Oh, nothing can be further from the truth. I remember having lunch with somebody who I just knew, due to their background, I came to the conclusion they're not going to want to discuss this, so I'm not going to bring it up. It's the first thing they mentioned when we had lunch, and we talked astrology for 2.5 hours. So it's one of those things that really cuts across all ages, races, ethnicities, levels of education. As someone who's involved with astrology, I had to learn to let go of making a preconceived classification of who might be interested and who isn't, and just kind of let other people drive the bus, so to speak. In fact, I know of not one, but two ministers who are professional astrologers.
Yeah, I know a
So
couple.
it's a very interesting world because and this is the metaphysics coming into play. This vibrational astrology. The theory is it's information coming from a higher dimensional space, but it's all connected. Well, it would make
Yes.
sense then that we have people from all walks of life. I was at a conference back in March where there were people in the room who there was an astronomer, there were numerous college professors, there was marriage and family therapists, there was even a physicist, I think, in the room. These are smart people from all
Yes.
walks of life. And it's like, okay, as you said, now I'm home. These are my people because they're all, here was the thread that ran across all of them. They were all open minded enough to say, gee, I wonder, what if, rather
Yeah.
than just slam the door shut. And when you do that, it really was a beautiful experience with so many different types of people from so many different types of personal and professional backgrounds, all
Mhm.
coming together to study this subject. It was quite remarkable.
So talk to us because I know this particular thing that you had mentioned, and it's in all of us, where we are fearful and we know where we need to go, but
Mm-hmm.
we are fearful of the unknown. And then at some point, we have to come to the point and say, because internally, Michael, we know it. Internally, we are all a mess. And we know that our safe place is in the unknown, but we don't know, we're having difficulty surrendering to it because it is a space that we are not familiar with. And so this is a common thing with everyone. But I believe, Michael, the minute, and I'm sure you'll attest to it, the minute we surrender, if you will, a couple of things happen. The peace of, oh my God, I was carrying this thing, this
Mm-hmm.
fearful energy with me for so long, and you get like a little relief, and then you begin to move forward in it, and somewhere down the line, Michael, the honest truth, you'll be like, why did I do that?
Yeah, right,
And
right.
so we question it, but we see incremental proof that we
Mm-hmm.
are there. And then the proof stops because a friend of mine told me it's the death of the vision, he calls it the death of the vision, to really test you to see if this is where you want to be, because you're going to be looking back going, I was making money over there. I need to go back there. I don't see anything here. But that
Mm-hmm.
was just put in front of you to see how serious are you about this. And when
Yeah,
you get to a space, I used to tell my kids, find your passion and be passionate about it,
yeah.
and be very passionate about it. So talk to us as far as when you surrendered and the doors began to move forward. What was going on with you, Michael, at this time?
So yeah, I'm not sure I have blanket advice for everyone, but I can tell you how I knew I was heading in the right direction.
Yeah.
And that is this. And I'll tell you, this is exactly the same thing that I went through when I started my assessment company 20 some odd years ago. And that is when you find yourself so engrossed in activities involving whatever it is that you're interested in or that you're good at or that you're doing, when you find yourself so engrossed that you're literally like, let me read just one more page.
Yeah.
Let me look up one more chart in astrology. Let me just do one more thing before I go to bed or before I got to shut the
Mm-hmm.
computer down. When you find that you're having to almost literally tear yourself away, that's a real good indicator that you're on the right path.
100%.
And and initially in my corporate work, I was doing that. I remember, in the early days, it's like my wife was, when you coming to bed? Oh, I got to buy one more domain name. I want to do this one tweak to the website. And I love doing it. It was great. Well, that wanes a little bit over time after a 20
Yeah.
some odd year period, and you need to kind of recharge the batteries. Well, with the astrology for me, it was it and still is. I mean, last night I've got consults tomorrow that I'm doing. I got a full day of consults, and I'm looking at charts of people who I'm going to be speaking with so that I can prepare. And it's like, oh, let me check this chart. Let me look at this vibrational pattern. Let me look. And before I know it, it's 4:30 in the morning. It's like, I got to go to bed. But that tells me that I'm in the right place, as opposed to, oh, I got to review all these charts. As soon as you start going down that path, oh, I'm dreading such and such. That's maybe an indicator that it might be time to look at other options. And while I'm still in the corporate space, I'm looking at really kind of transitioning things out to focus more and more on the astrology, and then just keeping and working with those clients that are an excellent fit for me, because the reality is not every client is easy and enjoyable. A lot of them are. I've got great clients, but
Yes.
I can then be more selective as far as who I
Yes.
work
Yes.
with, because it's like, all right, we can kind of shift more of where the energy is going to go to the astrology stuff. And let's face it too. I've been doing this so long. It was time for me to mix it up a little bit, because I'm not a retiring type of guy. What am I going to do? Play golf? It just
Yeah.
doesn't fit with my personality. I know myself well. I will probably be doing something that hopefully contributes positively to society until I draw my last breath,
Yeah.
because I'm just not, retirement is not the goal for me.
Yeah.
And with astrology coming into the picture full force, that's something that I joke around with folks. Well, I could do that from the nursing home, God forbid. As long as you got the computer, you can pull the stuff up. And and I like to be busy. And the thing with astrology is it never ends. There's new
Yes.
discoveries being made at a frantic pace, because now we have the capacity for people to do actual controlled research, and not just observational stuff, which is very weak. So you're going to see things come out of the VA astrology world fast and furiously, I think, now moving forward, because the mechanisms in place. So when you find, going back to your question, when you find that you're just having to force yourself to go to sleep, or put the book down, or stop researching something you're interested in, that's a good indicator that you're on the right path. If it's just kind of so, I can take it or leave it, I'll go watch Netflix, you haven't found it yet.
You haven't
Because
found
when
it
you
yet.
find it,
You're
you
right.
want to just soak as much of that in like a sponge. And it
Yeah.
may take a long time, but don't lose hope, because you got to keep turning those rocks over. And eventually
So
you'll
talk
find
to
the one
me.
that's
Yeah, you're
go ahead.
absolutely right. It's to, as again, I would tell the people is that you are working at this thing 29 hours a day, if there was such a thing, and you're not
Right,
tired. People are
right,
looking at it, say, "Aren't you tired?" And you go, "No, no, this is energizing me." So talk to
right.
us about, you are in your professional work, you're doing your underground thing, and boy, you had a meeting in Gainesville or
So
Jacksonville. How did that
as
happen?
far as the conference in Gainesville,
Yeah, the conference that now shifted you and
yeah.
made you. How did that came about, and when that shift took place, what
So,
happened to you?
oh, sure. So I've been into this vibe, the vibe. I mean, I'm a traditional, originally a traditional astrologer, Western astrology. There's 30 different subsets of astrology. We won't get into all that. And learn, the traditional meanings of the houses and planets and signs and all that stuff. And then I discovered VA about 5 or so years ago, and I started studying it loosely. And then I got into an apprenticeship program, and in the middle of that now with David Cochran, who is the father of vibrational astrology. And he's like the guy. He's the guy who's been researching this for 40 some odd years, looking at tens of thousands of charts and compiling the data. Well, the first time I went to a conference where you get a bunch of astrologers in the same room, was back in March. I'd never gone to an astrological conference before. I've been to many other business conferences, and most of them I leave and I'm exhausted.
Yeah, yeah.
You're having to, whether I'm speaking at the event or attending as a participant, they're good, but then you're beat at the end of it. But this was different, because these are very long days, starting in the morning, going till at least 5, 6 o'clock at night, and then informal meetings afterwards. And there was just a bunch of people all over this hotel, formally and informally, talking about astrology. And oh, well, I work with people who are primarily looking to relocate. One person says that's a whole branch of astrology, relocational astrology, to look at their picks of where they want to go and what might make the most sense. Other people are talking about how they do forecasting of other activities. And it was just like, there's so many layers to this. You can't possibly learn it all, but there's just so many different ways that you could apply astrology for other people's benefit, development, advancement, and being in amongst like-minded people who are excited to be there. You see, because let's face it, people go to corporate conferences, free bar and a buffet, and you got to listen to the CEO. Okay, they're somewhat happy to be there. It's a different vibe when you go to a conference that you're going to be there and want to be there because of the good stuff that you're going to get from it. So it was really eye-opening to realize that, hey, there's other people out there like me who have varied backgrounds. As I mentioned, there
Hmm.
was someone in this conference who was a department head at a university. I'm not going to say where or what.
Hmm.
So that goes again back into the point of, you never know who's interested in astrology. And there's a lot of people out there who are genuinely curious that go beyond the basic stuff that you see online as far as the sun sign forecast. So that was a really that was a positive experience in many ways, uh, to bring people together, to learn some of the current techniques that are out there, to look at the current research, and it was 3.5 days, and I was exhausted but also energized. Very
Yeah.
rarely am I energized at the end of a corporate event, just exhausted. So
Yeah.
that's how all that kind of came together.
That is awesome. I'm loving this conversation. And guys, I know that Michael has a lot of stuff, so we're going to try and get him back here as well, so we
Oh, I'd
can
love to.
continue this stuff. Because what I want to ask you now that you got centered, you figured it out, the vibrational, um, give someone a quick synopsis of that. Um, those that are listening to us, Michael, so that
Yeah,
and any of you guys are listening to us, I'm going to provide all the stuff so you can get in touch with him, so that you can have that conversation with him. So paint a basic picture to the audience
yeah,
so that they can know and take down that fearfulness. As you know, a lot of people have that, um, from where you came from, that the religious mindset. Um,
right.
talk to a client that just showed up, or is a potential client, if you will.
One of the first things I always tell people is astrology is not a crystal ball. You think of a crystal ball, you look into the ball, you gaze at it, and it's like, oh, well, I see in your future money coming your way and a relationship. It doesn't work that way. Astrology is more like a cosmic weather report. And
Hmm.
once you understand this difference, I think it puts a lot of minds at ease. A crystal ball implies that it dictates our future, but a weather report, be it cosmic or traditional, it doesn't dictate anything. It's just
Yeah.
information. So let's assume that the weekend's coming up and you and your family want to go to the beach. But you look at the weather report on Friday night and it says torrential downpours expected all weekend long. Well, you now have a choice to make. You still, if you wanted to, could go to the beach. You're going to get wet, probably not have a good time, but you could still go.
Hmm.
The weather report doesn't prevent you from going to the beach. But if you look a week ahead and say, smooth sailing and sunny skies from Thursday on, you might say, you know what? Let's postpone our trip until next weekend when the weather's going to be optimal.
Yeah.
That's all astrology is in a nutshell. It's a cosmic weather report that helps you make decisions and timing and clarifies where you came from so that you can then better navigate life here on earth. It's not dictating your behavior. We have free will. And by being able to add this information into our decision making process, it's another tool that we could use to navigate our lives. And once people hear that, it's like, oh, okay, well, that kind of makes sense. And when we say weather report, here's what we're talking about. In the sky right now, wherever you're listening to this in the world, there are planets moving overhead. And these planets in vibrational astrology, the theory is that each planet regulates a very specific process. One of the things that always kind of left me a little uneasy about traditional Western astrology is what I call the crowbar effect, where something you look at and you make an interpretation, and a person says, "No, that's not me," and then the astrologer says, "Well, but maybe if we look at the ruling planet for that house, it could be there," and you go look at that. Well, no, that didn't describe it. Well, what about? And then you're looking all over the chart to make things fit. We
Yeah.
don't do that in VA, which is, a lot of people find remarkable. The planets, based on research, each control specific processes. The sun brings things current and makes us focus on the here and now, what's in the light
Hmm.
of day. The moon
Yeah.
regulates emotions. Mercury connects thoughts and ideas. And some of these are linked to the traditional meanings of these planets in some extent, but the research has gotten very clear of what they do and what they don't do. So when
Yeah.
doing an interpretation, we don't crowbar. And if something doesn't resonate with someone, either A, it doesn't resonate, nothing's 100%. I'm not going to tell you that it is. And any astrologer who does, you probably want to avoid them. But the other thing is, a lot of times with VA, some of these traits that we see in a person's chart based on their planetary combinations and what's in your natal chart, some of these traits may be latent. They may be in
Yeah.
here, and you might have thought about them 20 years ago. I did a consult recently, and I said, are you involved with creative writing or writing fiction or anything like that? And it was a Zoom thing, and the person looked at me, and there was like dead silence. And I thought the connection went bad. I said, "You there?" They said, "Oh, yeah, I'm here." I hadn't thought about that in 25 years. That was my plan when I got out of undergraduate, but instead I ended up taking a job as a, whatever, and got on that path. And that's something that kind of haunts me that I was never able to do. And I said, "Well, here's the good news. You've got the circuit for it because that's VA's methodology. We all have different circuits or capabilities, more than
Hmm.
we'll ever use in this lifetime. Which ones we activate are entirely up to us." So I can almost see a relief. I said, "Look," I said, "maybe something to consider. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but there's not, in this day and age now, you've got a lot more opportunity than you had 20 years ago. It might be something to re-explore." And she was so energized because it connected with something that she had thought about and said, "Nah, this can't happen," shelved it, and that was the end of it. And that happens all the time in
Yeah.
VA consults because you're able to get to the real core essence of a person and figure out, or help them kind of clarify what they know at an intuitive level, but it helps make it more accessible. And that's vibrational astrology in a nutshell. We're very specific in our approach. When something doesn't work or doesn't resonate, we want to know it. And our mantra is question everything, because
Yeah.
that's how the models get more firmly defined. It's not about crowbarring, it's about questioning.
Oh man, I want to thank you so much, Michael, for coming to Threads of Enlightenment. This has been absolutely insightful. And those that are listening, again, I'm going to provide that information for you to get access to him. Again, Michael, thank
Cool.
you
Can,
so
can I
much
can I
for
just
coming.
mention a special offer to your folks that
Yeah,
going to put out there? Yeah.
sure,
So
sure.
the website for everything is blueridgeastrology.com. I live in the Blue Ridge Mountains, so that's pretty appropriate. blueridgeastrology.com. And from there, you can find the socials and where I do updates and all that sort of stuff. But the offer for your group is if they use the term threads with the S, threads, during the checkout for any personal consultation, that'll give them 20% off a personal consultation if they're choosing. There's a couple of different options available. That's THREADS. Put that in, it'll take it off. And you can put that in the show notes. That'll be active for about a month after this airs. I can't have it go forever, but certainly long enough by the time that this hits the airwaves that they could take advantage of that. And again, that's at blueridgeastrology.com. Lots of free stuff there too.
Excellent. Thank you so much, sir. You have a good one, man, and thank you for coming.
Thank you. It has been a pleasure. And I look forward to doing this again because astrology never ends. There's always more news to report.
Definitely, I'll take you up on that. All right.